All right, good afternoon, everybody. I would ask you if lunch was good, but it was Chick-fil-A, so lunch was fantastic, man. So the TV's going to come on here in a second. Anyways, a couple things I want to cover. So I'm Earls. We're going to talk about suicide and self-harm and practically how to save a life, how to intervene. And so along those lines, I brought some materials on the counter over there. And then I only have one sign left, but I'll talk about that later. So the important thing is I brought it. I don't want to take it home. Right? So it's free stuff. Good. Okay. So I was in the Army for a day or two, and we had mandatory suicide prevention classes. I'm curious, anyone been to a suicide prevention class or briefing ever before?
With nursing.
One, yeah, nursing. One? That's it? Oh, okay then. Well, this is not going to be like that, where a lot of times they spend time on warning signs and risk factors. This is going to be as practical as possible. I was born in Missouri, kind of show me, what's the so what. So the so what is what to do, right? When you have somebody you're concerned about their well-being, all right? So first, though, questions for you. I know you have questions for me, and I'm all good. I'm going to be ending this at 2 o'clock. That'll give us 2-ish. As a few minutes after, but we did some questions on the way. We for sure will have questions at the end. Okay, but I have some questions for you first. First question is, how confident are you on a scale of 1 to 10? All three questions, scale 1 to 10. 10 is the most, 1 is the least. And don't say it out loud, just kind of think to yourself or write it down. How confident are you that you could recognize someone in trouble or thinking about hurting themselves? How confident are you would know and recognize somebody who needed help like that? Are you going to answer?
Yeah.
No, don't answer.
Well, I had a comment too.
Oh, you have a comment? Oh.
I'm not confident. That's why I came here.
Well, that's fine. Some people, okay, wherever you are, we'll take you where you are and bump it up a notch. Okay,
right.
Next question. Next question. How confident are you that you would intervene, that you would, if you could recognize, you would do something, right? Second question. Well, let's say I recognize them, would I do something? Third question, how competent do I feel that I know what to do? If I saw it and I felt like I would do something, would I know what to do, right? So let's do a comparison. How many people would recognize a heart attack victim if they started having a heart attack? How confident are we could recognize that? Scale 1 to 10. How well do you think now that one I'm curious, actually you answering the question. How well do you think we could recognize a heart attack victim?
7 out of 10.
7 out of 10? Not bad. How competent do we feel that we could do something to help them?
0 out of 10.
What? You can't call 911?
I mean, it's a heart attack.
You can call 911. That's the first thing you're supposed to do, right?
Right.
Good. Okay. So we got heart attack. How about choking? Think you recognize someone who's choking? Yeah, I hope so. We got an international sign for choking. There's no international sign for I'm having thoughts of hurting myself. So they make it a little hard on us, so we got to figure it out. So what I hope is you're more confident in recognizing, more competent in doing something, and confident that you can do something to help somebody who needs help. Yeah? Okay. So these are 3 things, how we're going to roll through here. Common thoughts, emotions, behaviors of people contemplating suicide, and then for us to understand their experience. Because we tend to see it through our lens, and a lot of times when people make choices, we don't understand it because we look at it through our lens and not their lens. So we want to see it through their lens. And then the last thing is some practical interventions. So I'm going to try to knock out the first 2 in the first 15 or so minutes. We have plenty of time to get to the so what. What can I do, right? That competence piece of helping people. So it's a requirement if you speak on this kind of thing or any behavioral health, you have to have slide and numbers and data. I think this is my only one. So we'll knock this out. Suicide is bad. It's getting worse. The suicide rates of ideations and attempts and completions, and it was getting bad before the pandemic. Right? This is important to understand. We can't blame this on the pandemic. Substance abuse and suicidal behavior was going up. So what we need to understand is that somewhere around 20-ish%, 20, 25% of everybody you see at some point in their life is going to have thoughts of whether they should be alive or not. Very, very common. And we know that for sure 25% of our youth, 18 to 24, in the last year, not over a lifetime, in the last year had thoughts of hurting themselves. So if you deal with teenagers and young people, 25% are in near term are potentially having those kind of conversations inside their head. So this is the kind of stuff psychologists geek out on. We just go ape. I could spend the rest of the time and all day talking about this, but I'm be very, very good. The so what, right? What do you need to know here? On the left, this is kind of where we live, when we were kind of balanced, so to speak, in our homeostasis, where we regulate our emotions, kind of up and down, bad things happen, we kind of stay within our zone. By the way, sorry, I see a lot of phones. I'm happy to send these slides to you. If you don't take a picture of every slide, just leave your email and I'll get it to you. Okay, see, I forget that. I got to put that in there. All right, next. So we got this emotional regulation, and then our thoughts. How flexible are we? Kind of looking at different things from different perspectives. So I'm not getting too wrapped around the axle, so to speak. And then something happens, an event. It could be a financial crisis, a relationship problem. In the military, a lot of times, right? My girlfriend, boyfriend, somebody dumped me, and I'm in the dumps. Some loss of some kind is perceived. And that changes to what we used to kind of be in our homeostasis, gets really dynamic, and it gets really fluid, and we start hearing thoughts in our head about hopelessness. This is hopeless. I'm trapped. I'm in a bind. It's not going to get better. Emotionally, we start experiencing things like sadness, depression, guilt, agitation, anger, anxiety. Physically, there's a physical agitation where you get really restless, where sleeping becomes a problem. Pain gets increased. Whatever pain we have, physical pain, can be made worse when emotionally we're not doing well. And then behaviorally, we start to do things we maybe didn't used to do, or we stop doing things we did. So think about people withdrawing socially, or using substances, self-medicate. So that gets fluid. So this understanding there's been a shift, some things have happened and they're not handling them as well as either they used to or they would like, or certainly we would like. And then what happens is we have these different, I don't call them symptoms, we have different ways of thinking about what's happening to us. So I want to talk about each one of these, but I want us to think about like hopelessness. We kind of know what hopelessness is basically, but how would you recognize it? Because this is a real powerful and frequent one with people who are contemplating the end of their life by suicide. So how would you hear hopelessness if someone is sharing with you?
They're not sharing at all with me that they're going through something.
Okay, so they get real quiet. So then you're left to wonder what's going on. Okay?
They can't see how anything could get better.
Yeah, so they're going to say stuff like, this is not going to get better. Or, I don't understand how this is ever going to get better. Yeah? Go ahead.
They stop making plans for the future.
Yeah, but what would it sound like? How would you know?
What's the point?
Yeah, what's the point? Yeah, you'll hear that. What's the point? Someone in the back.
That's what I was going to say.
Oh, were you? Oh, man, you stole his answer.
You just hear them say that.
What's the point? That's a good one to listen for. Yes, ma'am.
The more I try, it seems like things just getting worse and worse.
There you go. So we talk about hopelessness as an idea, but what do they communicate? Right? You got to hear what they're communicating. They're not going to tell you I'm hopeless, but they're going to say this kind of stuff, and we need to pick up on, oh, that sounds like hopelessness. I got to file that one away and got to start to ask more about that. Burdensomeness. This is another. Who uses burdensomeness in a conversation except psychologists? We love. Ooh, yeah, I can study burdensomeness. Where's my? Do I need a dissertation? Okay, burdensomeness. What is it?
Stressed out.
Not quite. We'll get to stressed out. It's a special kind of stressed out. Burden.
It'd be better if I wasn't here.
On who? On everybody else. I'm a burden to other people. I'm actually doing them a favor if I leave. You see, it's a twist in the mind, right? Now, this couldn't be farther from the truth, but in their head, that makes sense. I know I'm a burden to myself and I'm in pain. I must be a burden to other people. So I love them, I don't want them to suffer, and I'm suffering, so why don't I ease their pain? Right, that burdensome. So how would you hear that? You'd be better off.
It would be better if I wasn't here.
It'd be better if I wasn't here. You'd be, or sometimes they're real explicit, like you'd be better off without me.
I wish I was never born.
I wish I was never born. Ooh, that's a good one. I mean, not really, but yes. And for what we're, it's terrible. But for what you're listening for, they are giving it to you. I am a burden to other people. And that's how, I guess what I'm trying to, listen for what they're saying, because they're educating you of what's going on inside. And that's what I'm assessing for. When I talk to somebody, I'm thinking this this is what I'm listening for, right? This is my kind of cheat sheet. I'm listening for hopelessness. I'm listening for burdensomeness. Am I a burden to other people? And they're going to use different words that make sense to them, but that's what I'm listening for. Burdensomeness, it's heavy. It's rare that we think about it, but it is really powerful. That's more significant, is what I'm saying. It's more serious. Lack of belonging. How are you going to hear that one?
No one likes me.
No one likes me. I don't fit in.
Nobody cares what
Nobody cares. Nobody can care. I'm going to go eat worms, right? Yeah, no, I mean, we got to think about that mindset. They don't feel they belong, even though we believe they belong. They don't feel they belong, right? That's that pain they're wrestling with, yeah? You might see some substance abuse, if they're using some, they use more, or change what they're using. I'm going to skip the last one and go up to psych ache. That's a definitely strange term. Who's ever had a headache? Everyone. How about a toothache? I went to the emergency room one time. Man, your teeth start hurting? Woof. That'll get your attention right now. Our psyche, our soul, our emotions can ache. And so Sneidman, who studied a lot of suicidology, came up with this idea, this concept of psychache, and there's 3 parts to it. There's an emotional pain and a press. So think press like under pressure, right? We think about it as stress, it's demand. Yeah, heavy. Perturbation. Okay, I think this is the last word I use that is just odd. Perturbation is agitation. It's like your skin is crawling, like you're vibrating inside. You don't know what to do, straight random voltage of energy. And it's this anxiety, agitation. It's different, but all 3 combined, and you get this psychache. And then a couple of things happen. Then we start getting so off, so bad, so to speak, so desperate. We start thinking, what do I do with this? And so for people who are feeling the first 4, there may not be suicidal if they don't believe that suicide is a coping tool. That's the last piece you have to have. You have to believe that it's a legitimate, acceptable way to handle my distress, right? My psychache, my lack of hope or belongingness or whatever, right? Is that that's a means to this end. And then another clue is deciding, okay, is it a desire to die or a desire to end their suffering? Those are slightly different things. We have to listen for that. So what would that sound like?
I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, oof. That's an easy one to misunderstand, right? We think like there's a little give up, not like the whole way, right? So that's something we got to ask about. Okay, so we'll talk about what to do with this, but this is what you're listening for, I hope. When you're just out and about, and the people you know and love are going through hard times. Because we don't know always how hard the time is, unless we ask and try to find out. So let's understand more about then the suicidal process. So what we know, and so they studied people who've attempted suicide and survived, and they asked them, hey, walk us through that process. And what we know is, from the time they had a thought, I'm going to hurt myself, until they did it, 70% was within an hour. That's not a long time. 25 up to 40% within 5 minutes. So we're talking about crisis, a real crisis moments. So when we get to means safety and how to help people be safe from a means of suicide, we're really talking about delay. How to delay them from acting on that impulse and that thought. We don't need a lot of time, we need a little bit of time because it can be really quick. So understand that it can be very impulsive, a very impulsive act. That if we get them through this crisis, that serious crisis moment, the odds of them dying by suicide are very small. Like 90% will die by something else besides suicide if we get them through that crisis. It's very important. That having the access to the means is as important almost as everything else, because if they don't have that access, we can get through the crisis easier. So we're going to whole time, we're going to talk about means safety. And then we know they're communicating to us in some of the conversations we've had, some of the things you've heard. 80% of the people who commit suicide or die by suicide have been to their primary care doctor within a few months of that event, right? So there's, look for other, I know that's funny, well, kind of we all go to primary care, but specifically there's something going on. So there's that, there's communication with the people around them in some way. So what we wanted to kind of tune our frequency in. So what I want to help you with is understanding, well, then what do we do? If we tune into this stuff, what do we do with it? So here's why I recommended kind of overview plan. How am I doing? Look at that. Okay, 15 minutes, we're in it. This is what you're going to do. By the way, I don't know if you realize, but by being here, you're deputized. Yeah, we'll talk what that means later. Okay, because there's not enough of us to solve this problem. There's just not. So first, check your assumptions. So we hopefully, and your knowledge, if you didn't know that stuff before, that's good stuff to know, I hope, about what suicide is and how the thought process goes. But then we have to check our assumptions because we believe certain things about people who are having thoughts of suicide. Societally, culturally. It's spread by the way culture spreads things. And some of them are helpful and some of them are wildly not helpful. Like, not productive at all. Harmful. So my first recommendation is be curious, not judgmental. By curious, you want to listen to them more than talk. So we'll talk about how to develop that interaction. And then you're going to try to improve their quality of the support that they're receiving. And you're part of that, like you're providing them more in tune support. And then how to activate the network. We'll talk about means safety specifically, and then I've got a bunch of resources at the end for help seeking, national connections websites, and then some other resources. Okay, so we've talked about kind of where their head is. Know this, whenever you engage with someone about their life and they're contemplating not being alive anymore, the fact that they're alive and breathing means they're at least ambivalent, right? They haven't decided to do it because they're still alive. And understand the piece of them that wants to live is way stronger already than the piece that wants to die because they're still alive. They don't feel that way. They feel broken. And they're not quite in tune with the whole rest of that piece, and that's part of our job, is, what did Warren say this morning, right? To be hope for them when they don't have hope for themselves. And come alongside them and share that. So understand there's a big piece of them that wants to live. And our job is to align with that, and because they're here, and if this is their will to live, we need to get that a lot stronger, right? Heavier. That's what you want to do. How to do that? One, first off, what not to do. So they have autonomy, and we got to respect the autonomy. So don't talk them out of it. That seems strange, right? Isn't that where you're here to learn how not to? No, you can't talk them out of it. Because why? Well, one, we have a writing reflex. I want to correct them. I want to write them and put them on the right path, right? Think of every parent of an adult kid ever. Right? Oh, you should do this. Well, we've all been an adult kid, and when somebody tells us what to do, what is our natural reaction?
The opposite.
No, man. I'm in charge of my life. Watch me go. Yes. So it's called reactance. If someone comes at me pursuing, right, I might have a tendency to run. If we're going to play cops and robbers, if someone wants to be a cop, there's got to be a robber. That's how the game's played. It's called the pursue-withdrawal cycle. Happens in marriages too, right? One person's going to pursue about something, and time to withdraw. Round and round we go. So when you're trying to talk them out of it, you're actually having them rehearse why they are that way, which is the opposite of what we want. So don't try to talk them out of it. This is like trying to talk someone out of smoking. Don't you know smoking's bad for you? What's the obvious reply? Yes, and this is why I do it.
That reminds me, I need a cigarette.
Yes! Yes, and now you annoyed me, so I'm going to go smoke. Right?
I'm so stressed. I'll be outside.
Right? So we're going to go through how to question, right, questions to get them talking about why they want to live. And their pain, right, so we can empathize with them. So let's get into that. Just be present and engaged. So first, radical acceptance. Acknowledge the fact that they're in pain. And help them acknowledge you're in pain, and I can be here with your pain. It's not going to overwhelm me. Because they feel overwhelmed. So right away, if like we're with them, oh, they can share with us. I'm not trying to talk you out of anything or anything. I'm just here with you, acknowledging that you're in pain. And it's simple. It's so simple. We make it way more complicated. Think grief, right? I mean, the last thing we do is walk into someone who's grieving and start talking to them. You just be present. You're in pain, and I'm here with you. Okay. Listen to understand. This is not the airplane listening when I'm just waiting for my turn to talk. Right? Okay. If you're flown and you're a stranger, somebody talks a conversation, you're really just like talking back and forth, but you're not really like getting to know them. Not that. I'm listening to understand what it's like to be in their world. That's real empathy. What's it like for them? You have to really slow down and pay attention. And you can do it. It's a human thing. When I validate their experience, I'm not reinforcing the suicidality. I'm allowing it to be present. It's there anyways. It's going to be there whatever I do. So yes, that's how you think and feel. And then, while you're doing that, you're listening for the hopelessness, the burdensomeness, the belonging, what their thoughts about suicide are. And then you can start to separate a little bit on this passive versus active methods as far as suicidality. Because there's people that they're struggling and they are thinking that it'd be easier to not be alive. And I'll say it that way sometimes. Are you thinking about not being alive? And that's different than do you want to die and do you want to kill yourself, right? So we start to tease that out a little bit. And there's some questions of how to do that. But that's kind of what you're listening for, because the person in a more passive, like, I wish I didn't have to wake up in the morning, is unlikely to actually be actively searching out means to end their life. But the other people are like, no, I need to die. And I'm the one. I've got a client I had one time who had a prophecy. She believed in her head she was going to die by her own hand. And it was prophesied to be so. Obviously, boy, we definitely got to work on that and all the other pieces that we've mentioned before. So what do you do? So here's questions. After you've got that kind of rapport and how are they doing, feeling, what emotions, right? What's present? Remember the activating event, what's going on? The activating event, there's one question you could ask is, hey, what's one thing? What's that one thing, if it were different, you would not want to die? That's a great question. I ask that of my clients. What's the one thing? It's called the one thing question. What's the one thing? Because that tells you maybe what is the stressor, right? What's that point that's kind of flipped the script for them? Okay, so this is from NIMH, National Institute of Mental Health, and they developed, this is, you got the website link for this in the last slide. It is a great kind of cheat sheet. You can print out on your phone, you've got it. And I love how they start. And recently, I would probably say, I don't normally talk about it in the last few weeks, that's clinically, but recently, have you wished you were dead? So it kind of gets to that passive sort of thing, right? Hopefully it doesn't put too much on the defensive. And then you can drill down, have you felt that you or your family would be better off if you were dead? What are they pulling for here? Burdensomeness, right? And what are they pulling for here? Hope, hopelessness, right? So we're assessing hopelessness. Good question for hopelessness, good question for burdensomeness. Have you been having thoughts about killing yourself, passive versus active, right? Let you know about kind of how much danger kind of are we in right this second. Have you ever tried killing yourself in your past attempts? Because that will tell us how foreign is this concept. If they tried before, potentially, right, there might be more easier to go from that flash to bang, the thought to the behavior. And then you're having thoughts of killing yourself right now. That's a great recency question, like right now. Because if it's right now, then tag you're it. You're not leaving them any more than you'd leave a heart attack victim. Good luck, Chief. Right? No. They're not out of your sight until they're somewhere safe, like the emergency room. And they're not going to like you, maybe. This is love, baby. And I love you, so here we go. Because if you can't trust yourself to be safe with yourself, I can't do that. So, all right, so that's a reason you got to know if it's now or not. You guys are pretty quiet so far. Any questions? We're going to end early like this, okay. Other questions. So that's a really good, tight assessment. Other questions that I've thrown in here that are important to know that may help you kind of get the context and the depth of kind of where they're at is asking specifically what goes through your mind when you're having these thoughts. Because maybe they have a vision of how they would do it or where it would happen or what is going on in their world that's kind of pushing them one way or the other. It's a great question because they get talking about it. And that's what you want, right? It's almost like, man, just kind of get the poison out. Let's hear where you're at. Have you thought about how you might carry yourself? So instead of asking, do you have a plan, which kind of sometimes people can get a little defensive with, have you thought about how you might do this? Now that will tell you about their means. And this is what we know about means. People are afraid, well, for the longest time, San Francisco refused to put netting under the Golden Gate Bridge. Well, it would mess up the aesthetics. Right, well, this is like suicide central. If someone's going to jump off a bridge, they would fly across the country to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. Why? We don't know. But it's a very, very popular spot to kill themselves. And so the thinking was, well, if we put the nets under that bridge, they'll just jump off another bridge. And not really. That's not how people think when they're in the suicidal moment. Once they decide on the means, that's the means. And if they don't get access to that means, they have to stop and think about it. So I'm not really, it's called means substitution, is not really a thing. It may happen, but it's very, very rare. And normally when we block that means, we're actually pretty good. So that's why we'll talk about means safety. How detailed is it? Do they have access to those means? Have you taken any actions towards ending your life? Okay, this isn't just rehearsal, but let's say they have a medication. They might be saving the medication, right? Or have you practiced? So some people will take a gun, empty the chamber, and then practice because it's a hard thing to hurt yourself. And
Or they'll look up on the internet how many
yes,
medications they can take.
yep. Or they'll look up different ways of doing it, right? Yeah. You just got to know, hey, what are you thinking? That's all what are you thinking? What's going through your head and heart? And then how does thinking about suicide help you or hurt you? Now, this is a strange question, right? I mean, I saw it, I think, that is kind of a strange question. And yet, some people, by thinking about it, are actually soothing themselves because they're in so much pain. Thinking about it is actually distancing themselves from the actual pain. And so it's weird if you've not been in that world before to think that in some way it's serving some purpose. Can we understand the purpose it serves? And also tells you how consistent it is with how they see themselves. Is it an outside pressure or more an internal kind of thing? How acceptable is this to them? Okay, I'm going to stop because I think we have reactions to the questions. How do they seem to you? How do they go down in your head? Confusing, okay, too simplistic. I'm kind of looking for some nonverbals. I got a little bit, a couple of smiles, and a thumbs up. Whew, that's
I think
good.
the questions are great. My personal experience is that the people I've been dealing with are really upset. And so how to diffuse that to even get to asking
yeah.
a simple question.
Yeah. Yeah, if they're in crisis mode, you got to address the crisis first, right? You got to get their brain slowed down and their respiration, honestly, right? Get them off a flooding kind of mindset. Even then, though, if they're really agitated, there's ways to sell it, like to introduce the question, which is, hey, look, right? People think all kinds of thoughts when they're in crisis mode. And I just need to know for our own well-being here while we're doing this, are you thinking about not being alive? Is it so bad that you're wondering, hey, might be better off dead? And that maybe is a way to kind of acknowledge the distress they're in and assess for that. Because that's what you don't want to do is ignore the immediate distress, right? So that's how you use kind of an empathetic statement on the front end to kind of get into the, and so what are you thinking? And even if they, oh, no, you're not. Good. Oh, be mad at me. That's fine. Now I know. And I can go right back into crisis mode. I think at some point, here's trust your instincts. Develop your instincts. If you think they might, then ask. You are not going to put the idea in their head. That's not a thing. That's not how it works. A lot of parents are afraid to, afraid. I think they're afraid to ask the question because they don't know the answer. Clinicians, right? Sometimes they're afraid. Pastors, everybody's like, because I don't know what to do if they say yes. Well, man, I hope we get past that and know they're already thinking it. And what they really want is someone to come alongside of them that they can share that with. It relieves some of that burden, some of that stress. If someone's willing to say, hey, are you thinking about not being alive? Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're afraid, right? But we're not going to make it a moral issue. It's not a moral issue.
But
We're not going to judge them.
They can trust to talk to.
Right? Yeah, right?
But then they get quiet.
Yeah. Well, what if you make it a moral issue and judge them? Yeah.
Well, basically, they think like they can't talk to nobody because they feel like they're going to be judged.
Correct. So when someone shows up who's not going to judge them, who accepts it as it is, right? Because you're having the thoughts anyways, then you've given them an opportunity to share, right? Okay, let's talk about means safety then. So means safety. So there's a means to hurt themselves, and we're going to keep them safe from that means. So I've got a trigger lock on there because we're going to talk about gun control. I don't mean the Second Amendment or a trigger squeeze, right, or aligning your sights. I mean, when there's a firearm in the house, how do you keep it out of harm's way of someone who wants to kill themselves or a kid, right? So this is what we know for fact, that over half of all gun-related deaths are suicides. And that most suicides are guns because they're crazy lethal. Now, most men kill themselves and they choose guns. So when I say gun control, how do we keep a lethal means of suicide out of the hands of someone who wants to kill themselves? It's got to be at least 5 minutes to get that gun. Ideally an hour, which means, is the gun in the house? Well, would you let someone who's drinking have their car keys? Is that a responsible thing to do? So,
We drive?
how to make the medicine go down? These are questions of how to make the medicine go down. They need to explore the reasons. Sometimes they remember this kind of paradox. We let them talk about the suicidality and their distress, not try to talk them out of it. So sometimes we let them talk about why they don't want to not have access to their firearms, especially if they're law enforcement or military, or they're having to a gun culture. So we asked, would you be willing to talk about safety procedures? Generally speaking, do you have guns in the home? Would you be willing to talk about safety procedures for those firearms? As a gun owner, just generally speaking. And I sometimes ask them, is it a good idea to have someone who's drinking and drunk to have car keys? Oh, no. Okay, good to know. We can use that later. So since people want to talk themselves into this, we want them to do that, right? So here's how I think about it. When I was first in training, they told us, look, don't work harder than your client. They've got to be working hard. They're the ones that are going to be doing this. So we're helping them save their life. I want them to talk about why it's a good idea to restrict access to this lethal means. And so these are some questions to get them thinking and talking about what to do about this crazy lethal mean that is really potentially easily accessed, and they'll do something that you can't take back. So there's some questions there about how to get them talking about the storage of what you do with kids in the home, right? If there's firearms, are they protecting for that, and what's the right thing to do? So look, I spent a lot of time in the Army and psychology. I saw a lot of things come through my desk. There was a soldier that was at a friend's house, and he had a loaded revolver on the coffee table, and his friend's last words were, "Is this loaded?" She put it to her head and pulled the trigger. I'm thinking if the gun was in a safe or had a trigger lock that she didn't have the key to, she might still be alive. Right? So, another guy's, he walks into the barracks room and they're all playing video games and he says, who wants to play Russian roulette? And he's not kidding because he has a revolver in his hand. They say no, keep playing the video game, and on the way back to his room, he loses. So I'm thinking if that had been, like he was drunk, like really, really, really drunk, if they had not had access to that gun, he might still be alive, right? So this is the kind of thing we're trying to prevent. And then there's people who actually, right, they're more forethought than those couple, but there is almost no excuse, right? If we have firearms, we want to police that up and we want to do the right thing. There's a lethal means guide at that website, the VA. As we know, the veterans are the 22 suicides, I think a day they're talking about, if I remember right. And a lot of those are firearm deaths. So, medications. So I've got a client that it's a medication issue. So hey, how to secure the medication? Put it in a box and put pictures of her favorite people on top of the box and put the box away. So she's got several steps she has to go through. And when she gets there, she's confronted with the faces of the people she loves, part of her hope. And she got to think about this. There was a law enforcement, they put pictures of his kids on his gun safe. So when he got that kind of thought, that trigger, he got a little antsy about it, he had to face his kids when he accessed his guns. It was just a way to think about, what are you doing? We're just trying to get that piece that wants to live, give it some space. Yeah? Okay. Resources. So here's some national resources and state resource. 988, the FCC is going to turn on at 988. 988 is like 911, except it goes to the National Crisis Hotline. And it's for this kind of stuff. So instead of calling 911, you can call 988. So that's what's coming. Because humans are pretty good up to 7 digits. We remember 7 digits pretty good. 10 is a lot, even though talk is talk. 3, we can crush 3. We definitely got 911 down. So 988. You got the South Carolina Department of Mental Health Crisis Line. There's a Spanish language crisis line. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline.org has a lot of the same materials that we would walk someone through with over the phone, but it's online. And then this morning's speaker talked about the texting, the 741-741. So you text home to that number and you get a crisis counselor you can text with. And then apps. So these apps are fantastic. So this is called the Virtual Hope Box. This is a DoD VA product that we use with our soldiers. So we talked about hope before, right? And hope is super important. So the first hope box were actual boxes. And in the box would go pictures or trinkets, things that would remind me of what my hope is. And so now with cell phones, you can download that app and you can pop pictures of your favorite people and kind of what is your hope. And you put that in there. And there's a space for how to self-soothe, regulate, relax. There's all kind of different strategies in crisis mode of how to deal with it. So it is fantastic. I use it with all my clients who have any kind of smells, anything that smells like suicide. You don't need to be a clinician to recommend this thing. That's why it's up here. Anyone wrestling with their longevity and self-harm, this is a great tool. There's another one called the Stanley Brown Safety Plan. Stanley, 2 doctors, that's why it's Stanley Brown. There it is. It's a safety plan. And there's several different things, beginning with what are my signs for me that I know I'm starting to struggle extra? What are some things I can do? Who are the people I'm going to call and reach out to? And it's all laid out for them. So when they start to feel bad or worse, they go to their safety plan and start working the safety plan. Again, that's a thing anybody can use and access, and I hope people will try that. And then we have websites. There's, the information that's out there, that's available to help people, help other people, or for individuals to receive help is a ton. There's almost no end to it because everything's on the internet. But I would highlight a couple things. The Council for Suicide Prevention, Aiken County, has got a page where it's like what to say. So it kind of reviews some of the things we talked about, like the questions to ask. And then it's got several of those, and then there's one that's in red. It says, don't say. I love that. Don't do that. And then what to say, right? Because the odds of you remembering all of this and just getting it, it's you're being exposed to it. I'm giving you resources to then go practice, right? Okay. And then the one underneath that, mantherapy.org. So this was started by a group in Colorado who understood that men kill themselves way more in America, way more than women do. And they're less likely to seek help, right? That's why we kind of want to reinforce help seeking, take it through the crisis moment. So they've developed this crazy website. It's crazy funny. They've got a fake doctor called Rich Mahogany. And he's in a man cave. And he tells funny stories, but it's resources. It's loaded with resources. It's like man code for how to get help. A warning, it's not built by Christians, and some of the language is a little salty. I'll just tell you that. However, it's great information and all great resources specifically designed for testosterone makers. So mantherapy.org. And then the Now Matters Now and the Don't Give Up Signs. So the don'tgiveupsigns.org, if you've ever heard of them, there was a family, really started with a mom. She'd read how bad the suicide rates were, and she thought, well, I've got to do something about that. So her and her husband made up some signs and started posting them around their neighborhood, and then people were like, oh, those are great signs, what do we do? And it's become a huge movement. So I bought some signs. Because you came in the afternoon, there's only one left. So don't hurt each other getting up here, but this is what it is. Like, well, there's a lot of different slogans, but this one is You Matter, and the other one is Don't Give Up. Just a reminder, this is the little stuff that we think, oh, what, right, so corny, right? What's the big deal? No, I'm telling you, this little stuff is just reminders. We're just trying to touch that piece of them that wants to live. Yeah, we just want to tickle it sometimes, just kind of make it come alive. So my story is, there were some of these signs put up not far from where my church, where my clinic is. And I had a client one time come in, and he was saying how, not hopeless, but he could see it from where he was. And just wasn't sure, like, if this was working, if what was working, and he was just, like, I don't know, man, because it was rough with him and his wife, and he wasn't sure how it was going to go. And then he says, and then I saw that sign, it said, don't give up. I thought, yeah, all I have to do is not give up, and it's going to be okay. Yes, score one for the good guys. This is little stuff. So I've given these out before to people and put them in their yards, put them around the neighborhood. Just stop somewhere and put. The one that I put up was the corner of Belvedere Clearwater Road and Highway 1. But I don't know. We're just spreading good news, right? That you matter. Hey, we're all created in the image of God. There's only one of us ever made in all of mankind's history. But we lose when they get in this kind of thought process. They lose that. We just want to remind them. So when I say you're deputized, there'll never be enough mental health providers to solve this. Never. There will never be enough inpatient facilities to do this. This is us as a community, as families, as people, listening to understand where people are at and not being afraid to ask those hard questions and believing we can do something about that, yeah? Okay, I've got other materials, others, anyways, I'll put it this way. I brought it to give away, I don't want to take it home. It's free. We should all be crazy about free stuff. Okay, questions. That's my last slide. We have 15 minutes.
The schools are beginning, some have already started, but by next year, South Carolina law, I think, is all the student IDs will have the suicide.
Oh, that's it, yeah.
On that ID, which I think is a fabulous idea. Some districts have already done it, but starting, I think it starts next year, mandatory.
Yeah. Ooh, I have three questions for you. How confident are you that if you heard certain things, you would think, oh, they might be in trouble? 1 to 10. Compared before, right? Do your own kind of. How confident do you feel that you would have an idea of what to do, what to say, or what not to say? How confident are you, this is a lot, how confident are you that you would do something, you would speak up and ask the question? Now, last one's tough. We got to believe that we have something to offer. Well, yeah, you do. As long as you're speaking the same language, you can do this. Right? Just being present, being willing to listen, believing that you're not overwhelmed by emotion. And emotion is what we experience, like the weather. Yeah? You can do it. We need you. If we're going to help each other, this is how it's going to have to be. Okay. Other questions?
Member of NAMI.
Oh, yeah.
And we have a program called Ending the Silence that's being presented to schools around the state. Since this time last year, 30,000 middle schoolers and high schoolers have heard the presentation. And we've heard a lot of anecdotal stories about it.
Yeah, this is a great time to get people, right? Because they can believe, we're telling them, what you guys are telling them is, we believe you can make a difference. Listen, pay attention. And if you have this experience, there's other people who can help you. You're not super like all by yourself, right? This is fantastic.
And they've expanded that even to go with that goal line green.
Oh,
Which is the
man,
football, they've done it in the football games, high school, sponsored by the Ryan Holinsky.
Oh, yeah.
Holinsky's
I'm not familiar with that one.
Hayden Hurst,
Okay.
who plays for the Atlanta Falcons, is a former South Carolina player who has had mental illness and has actually tried to take his own life and was unsuccessful. I hate that term, but
Right.
yeah. Anyway, he's helped sponsor the Go Lime Green. I've participated with NAMI in a couple of those. I'm not a part of NAMI.
Right.
I just have a lot of high school
Concern,
teachers.
yeah.
Hey, doctor, you stand here and sign people up for an Amy on the way out, yeah? Now, this is what's it called, the program with
Ending the Silence.
Ending the Silence. Ooh,
And the
that's
Go
good.
Lime Green.
And the Go Line Green is new.
I'm telling you, there are so many resources out there, like there's no way to capture it all, but this is why we do some of this getting together conference stuff to learn something new about other resources.
When you think about it, my organization, we just purchased, I'm in Clemson, and we purchased a sports talk show. The sports talk is real big where I live, and we've been trying to mainstream the conversation because, after the killing of the Marines there in Afghanistan, tragically, that was on the news 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 24/7. 129 people in this country commit suicide every day,
Yeah.
and nobody even talks about it.
Nobody-
Yeah.
It's like having 10 of those incidents every day, and nobody's even said anything. So we purchased the show for one day, and they devoted every commercial break and in between the sports talk, we got plugs in for
that's great.
Educating people on suicide awareness, and it was really pretty awesome. And had a real nice two hosts that did the show. And
Yeah.
we thought we got a lot of good vibe from it.
I would encourage you, continue, like this isn't enough, continue to educate yourself and increase your confidence and competence in doing this, because I don't know if you'll ever have the chance to use CPR, but I guarantee you will have the opportunity to interact with someone in crisis, in a mental health crisis, that if it doesn't go well for them, they could kill themselves. And we don't know who's going to kill themselves and who's not going to kill themselves. So we don't need to worry about that. We just need to be willing to listen, to ask questions and listen to the answers and be present with them and help them link up with the resources that are going to help them get better. Yeah? That we can take to the bank. Yeah.
If you know somebody that does plan to kill themselves and you identify their means, maybe it's
Right.
a gun or medication or whatever it is, they're not just going to hand it over to you because they have plans with whatever this means is. How can you kind of...
Well, they might.
They might? Okay.
Sure. Well, they don't want to die. Otherwise, they'd be dead already.
Yeah.
There's a piece of them that wants to live.
Yeah.
And what we want to do is get that piece talking and thinking for them. And when they're clear and not in an immediate crisis, now in immediate crisis maybe not, but they'll offer, we want to get with that means safety questions to the point where they say, you know what, it's better for me, will you take this? I mean, that can happen. Now, if it doesn't, then we're in a little bit of a bind, like I'm not feeling safe, right? And let's think through this of how we want this to go. If your question is, what do we do? Well, then it gets a little bit hairy, right? And ideally, Maybe do they stay where the guns are? Maybe they go somewhere else. Leave the guns where they are and they move. Not move, but you know what I mean? It's not for typically a long term. It's through that momentary crisis. Yeah? And get them plugged in with some resources. But
What if they, how would it be? I just had it, but I lost it.
okay, it'll come back. If it's important, it'll come back again.
Okay.
Is there a percentage of, or, I don't know what the word is, but that leads from like self-harm to suicide?
It can. So self-harm, I added self-harm in there. People who are cutting, that's obviously hurting themselves, and yet it's not necessarily a suicidal event. It's something, it's something maybe, but it can. I mean, there's people who cut and harm, right, try to end their life. It depends on what's maybe driving the cutting and kind of where they're at mentally and emotionally. There's some disorders that it's both and sometimes it's either or. Yeah, and so that's why we gotta be, what does the cutting behavior mean to them? Right? So a little bit like, what does this mean to you that you're having thoughts of not being alive, right? It's not always almost never the behavior, it's what the behavior means to them. What do those thoughts mean to you? And that's what we have to sit and explore and see, because that's maybe a different kind of resource to deal with the self-harm.
So that cutting relieves stress, let's say.
Right.
Is the response then, let's look at other ways to relieve stress?
That's your strategy, but if you say that, then they're going to
Okay,
say, well,
so
this
what-
works, why would I stop doing it?
Right,
Right?
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what we want, and that's the best for them, because what we want is a different way to self-soothe. Right? I mean, a different way to regulate their emotions
Yeah.
than cutting themselves. And so it's the same way where I want them to talk about the change. I want them to be talking about why it's a good thing to not cut and to do something else. I don't want to be the one doing that, because then they're going to talk about why it works. So you got to flip it. But really what they need professional, we can get them to professional help to help them through that.
Now what if they're scared, the reason why they won't do it yet is because they're scared they won't succeed?
Oh, good. That's great. We bought ourselves some time. They're telling you, I'm afraid to die. I'm afraid it won't work. And we've got some time to work with. That's how I hear that. So now let's talk about what's really going on. What's that event, right? What's the thought process of how are you dealing? So you can ask this question. It's the one thing question. If one thing in your life would change, what, let's back up. What would change, if one thing could change in your life, it would make you safer, not want to kill yourself? What would have to change? What would that one thing be? So then what they're going to tell you is, this is what's going on in my life that I want different. Oh, well, let's address that, because that's what's driving the train. You know, with some of their thoughts about their self-worth. And so what's the one thing, if it were different, you would be better? So that's another way. Then see, it opens up, if I have time, we have time to address whatever's going on. And
You think about it, one of our theories, I guess, is that stress and trauma is so much more prevalent today than it's ever been. I mean, and social media is a lot of, I'm not just an old man. Because I like social media, but it does increase stress, increases trauma. You combine that with mental illness, and then you throw an event like a breakup or a financial crisis, you've got a volatile situation. And this basically, I taught 40 years and coached high school basketball for 40 years, and I'm recently retired. But I'm telling you, the stress and trauma is harder to be a kid now than it's ever been. And I've seen a lot of years out of it. It's just, it's tough. And when I was a kid, if you made fun of me, I'd go home. If you go home now, social media's with you. You're never away from it. Ever.
So it's about being aware of what stresses and pressures there are and how to help them in the crisis. So I don't want to lose sight of this one thing. I talked a lot about in the moment of addressing someone who's having thoughts. That's just to get them through this immediate crisis and for you to align with them. Man, the next piece which isn't the so what. So what do we do to help them? That's the piece that once we decide, okay, they're not an imminent threat to kill themselves, then how do I get them plugged in, and how do I help them seek the resources they're going to need to get them through to the point where it's no longer an option to kill myself. Killing myself doesn't make any sense because now I have these other tools to manage my emotions and my life and these events, and this stress is something I deal with. Yeah. You had your...
Well, I was just gonna say, like, I guess I've had the idea of, you know, for me with my personality, starting in middle school probably of like, it just would be better if I was gone,
Yeah.
you know? And every time I have like a life crisis, well, I have 4 kids, so, you know,
Right.
if there's a crisis in my marriage,
Yeah.
like there was 5 years ago, I go to that space.
Yeah.
And I've been in counseling several different times, but it's just been little spurts of counseling.
Yeah.
And so my husband's a youth pastor now, so there's these 2 girls that are really struggling with this. One's in an inpatient place right now, and she's about to come back, and her mom, like, I want to give her hope, but for some personalities, it just, you know, sometimes it keeps coming back, but to where you can get to the point of like, that's no longer an option.
Yes.
Just to, you don't want them to be hopeless, but if you can just keep piling the tools in their toolbox, like how divorce isn't supposed to be an option. You know, like when
Right.
you get married, they say,
Yep.
don't make divorce an option, if that can be talked about.
We don't control what thoughts pop into our head, right? I mean, and we don't do everything we think because life would be chaos, right? So we have a big frontal lobe that's a brake on these thoughts. So if this thought's entered once, it could happen anytime. What we need is the resources, the ability to emotionally regulate, right? And how to deal with those thoughts. So there's just a thought that passes through my head. It's not something I spend time with or is a reality for me. It's just something that pops up. It does, yeah. Exactly, that's huge. Like, oh, well, this thought popped up. That doesn't mean anything about my character or how I am as a man or woman or my identity, right? I mean, it's just, that thought popped back into my head. Look, it's here again. Okay, I know how to deal with that, right? It speaks more to this moment than it does about me or anything else. Yeah, that was a great, right? Because you have tools. We have the tools how to make sense of this thought. That's what we really want for them to have. You've got the tools of how to handle this thought the same way we handle lots of other thoughts that aren't helpful for us. Yeah?
That's all they think about every day, all day.
Well, in the moment, they're in crisis moment, that's where they need treatment, right? They need a way to learn the skills to get to the other side, yeah?
Yeah, and one thing that nobody has ever mentioned, which happened to me, is you also have to check on medication, because I was given medication for a rash. My thoughts went total suicidal.
Wow.
And luckily I had enough, I sat down on the bed and I thought, why do I want to kill because I really did.
Yeah.
I really had the feeling that I wanted to kill myself, but I had enough sense to say, why do I want to kill myself? And I'm thinking, what's going on in my life? Everything was going good. And I'm like, well, I got this new medication. That was it. I got rid of the medication. I had never had a problem. But
That is-
nobody mentioned it, but the medication.
Medication side effects, I mean, we just don't know. We got to, right, again, being present, kind of taking stock of, well, what's different, what's new? Yeah? Yeah, good. Thank you guys for being here. Hope it's helpful. And you got free stuff. Take free stuff.